Thanks, Well. I just want to say, I am really so honored to be here. My third time with the One Book, One Community. I was here 2 years ago for Voyage, you guys. Thank you so much. And several years ago, when you were still kind of affiliated with Bridgewater State, I was there for Dark Tide. So that was also awesome. So Bridgewater and the surrounding communities have been fantastic to me, and it's just, I really appreciate it so much. So thanks for that. Just a couple of other shout outs for me. I know there's a whole team that puts this together. You have all these wonderful events. You have author events. You have your trip into Boston and Faneuil Hall, as you said. Different groups, different organizations with book clubs. Appreciate all of that. But I'll just mention two people. Ellen, listen, you get more reminders from Ellen than anyone else. I do. Like, fantastic. Like, here's the event coming up. Here's the event coming up. Here's the event. There she is. Fantastic. Yes. So I really do appreciate that.
I need to interrupt you one more
Yes.
time. I totally forgot to point out the Underground Railroad quilt,
Yes.
which has been brought over from West Bridgewater. This was the creation of a number of our members here who did the research about each of these squares is a symbol of escape to freedom. And so this is the quilt that's usually hanging in the various libraries.
Wherever.
Right, and there's also,
Many libraries.
there's a video of interview with Debbie DeLutis describing too. So be sure to take a look at the quilt. The explanation of the squares is in this blue book here. So there's that too, which I totally forgot. Sorry, Steve.
Yeah, you can throw it back to me. You ready? So there's Ellen, unbelievable, irrepressible Ellen. She's amazing. And actually, I said two, but there's three. Willie Wilson and I first met more than 2 decades ago when Dark Tide first came out at a teacher's. I spoke at a teacher event, and my high school teacher was there, and he was very proud, and so we had our first meeting at that time. So great to see you here, man. I really appreciate it. I'm honored by that. And then very quietly, usually, is Jen Finn, who sits at the back of the room, who stands at the back of the room, who really lurks around corners. But she has been really fantastic, like, again, organizing these things. As you guys know, most of you know, these things are not easy to do. They're very hard to do. You know, scheduling, you know, what back and forth with me 5 times on what date works, you know, where we're gonna have it, what we're gonna do, how the run of show is gonna go, the whole thing. It's not easy what happens in the background. And so she handled it flawlessly, so thank you for that. So I'm thinking I might shake things up a little tonight, just a little bit. First of all, so here's what's gonna let me know. How many of you have actually read this book, The Great Abolitionist? Oh, thanks. See? All right, so I think what I'm going to do, normally I stand up here and talk for 45 minutes. I think it's always a good presentation, and then I get to Q&A, but I think I might try to get to Q&A a little quicker, if that makes sense, and we can let the story unfold through the questions. Does that make sense to you guys? Because I feel like are you guys going to have any questions? Wait, before I do that, what if I say, are there any questions and no one raises their hand? Is there a shot of that happening?
We have questions.
Okay, excellent. So we can do that. I'll just start with this. First of all, this is my 708th appearance as an author, 708. Three of them in Bridgewater, so 705 in other places, but fantastic. And like I said, I want to thank you guys for coming out. You know, you have lots of demands on your time. I recognize that. It's not lost on me. I think of that every time I speak in front of a group, that people actually make the time to come and be at an event like this. It's very heartening for me, and I think for any author or any historian, that people will come out and want to talk a little bit about history and a little bit about books. So thanks for this. This book, you guys may know, came out in April. It's done well. I've gotten a lot of great response on it. The critics have been good, and the reviewers have been good, but most of all, most important to me, the readers have been great with their response. I've gotten more emails on this book than any other book I've written. You know, in this short time, I'm saying. You know, Dark Tide's 20-something years old, and, you know, so you get over time you'll get them, but in terms of just a book launch in April, and from now, that's what, 7 months ago, whatever, getting a lot of great response. So that's been wonderful. Emails, people email me. I love when people email me. And so that's been very gratifying to me. I really, really do appreciate that. People have asked me, why Sumner, before they've read the book, why does he deserve a biography? The first biography, the last biography, the most recent, before this, the full biography was done over 50 years ago by David Dottle, the historian from Harvard, who did a 2-volume biography of Sumner, one in 1960 and one in 1970. So that's the last full biography on Sumner, before this one. And I had one person at a presentation come up and say to me, listen, this Charles Sumner, I don't know anything about him. The only thing I know about him, the only thing is that the Sumner Tunnel is named after him. So I said to him, to this person, that's not true. So if that's the only thing you know about him, you know nothing about him. Great that you should read this book and get more information about him. So the way you guys know if you've read the book, the way I describe Sumner in this book is the most important, the loudest, the most unwavering, strongest, controversial, anti-slavery and equal rights voice in America for 2 decades, the decades of the 1850s and 1860s. That is the run-up to the war itself, the assassination of a president, and Reconstruction afterwards. That 2 decades, astonishing, a very, very long, yet very, very short 20 years. But what happens in there is unbelievable. I mean, just think about it. When we say 20 years, the run-up to the war itself, think about what Sumner led and what Sumner was directly involved with or influenced. Things like the Fugitive Slave Law, things like the Kansas-Nebraska Act, bleeding Kansas, bleeding Sumner when he's beaten to within an inch of his life, right? Dred Scott decision, the John Brown's raid and execution, Lincoln's election, the secession of the South, the attack on Fort Sumter, the Emancipation Proclamation, Gettysburg Address, all of the terrible carnage in Virginia in 1864, Lincoln's re-election, kind of surprise re-election in 1864, right? And then his assassination in 65 and the war's end. And then, if that weren't enough, all of that Reconstruction period, the tumultuous impeachment of Andrew Johnson, the Great Reconstruction Amendments, right? The 13th that abolishes slavery, the 14th that declares that blacks are citizens and puts equal protection and due process into the Constitution, and the 15th that allows black men the right to vote, right? And the cherry on top of that, I always think, is in 1870, Sumner is very influential in seating Hiram Revels, right, in the United States Senate, the first black member of Congress in American history. He's from Mississippi, and he takes the seat of the former Confederate States of America president, Jefferson Davis. Wow. Right? Kind of an ironic, but just tops off, I think, Sumner's amazing influence. So that's why I say in the book that Charles Sumner, I think, is one of that small group, he's in that very small group of most influential Americans in our history that are non-presidents, that did not become president. So that's the group: Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, Susan B. Anthony, Martin Luther King Jr., Sumner, right there. Like, I think that's the starting 5 if you're a basketball fan. Sumner at center, he's 6'4". So that's the group that you would say are the most influential non-presidents. Now, that group is more influential than many presidents, but in terms of them not reaching that top office, they were extremely influential in American history. Sumner, of course, starts this, and like I said, I'm going to truncate this presentation to you so we can get to questions. He starts it before he even gets elected in 1849, when he argues the Sarah Roberts case. Remember? Like, that's the beginning of this book. The Sarah Roberts case, which is the case of a 5-year-old black girl whose father sues the Boston School Committee because Sarah is required to walk by 4 all-white schools to get to an all blacks. So he loses at the school committee level, he loses at the lower court level, and he argues, he goes to the Supreme Court on appeal. And Charles Sumner argues this case with Robert Morris, a black attorney, only the second black attorney in America. It's the first black-white team of lawyers in America to argue. When Sumner does the bulk of the appeal argument in front of Lemuel Shaw, who's the Chief Justice of the Massachusetts Supreme Court. And for the first time in American history, the phrase equal justice under the law is used, is uttered in an American courtroom, and that's by Charles Sumner. Wow. For the first time in American history, what else? Separate but equal is inherently unequal, is declared by Charles Sumner in 1849. Need you to remember how early that is in this equality, equal rights battle, right? 1849 is very early, and Sumner is using phrases like that, separate but equal, inherently unequal. He's literally 100 years plus ahead of his time. Now, a lot of his language finds its way into the 14th Amendment. The Equal Protection Clause is in there. That's Sumner's language for the most part. But think about this. That language is used almost directly, quoted almost verbatim by Thurgood Marshall in 1954 in Brown versus the Board of Education, which is the Supreme Court case that, as you know, that ruled that separate but equal is inherently unequal. Marshall uses a great deal of Sumner's arguments from 105 years earlier. Pretty amazing stuff. A lot of Sumner's thoughts and words are used by Martin Luther King during the Civil Rights Movement. A lot of them find their way into the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and a lot of them find their way into the debates, into the language of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Sumner is the person that launches all of that. So I say the loudest, most influential anti-slavery voice during this period is not Lincoln, not William Lloyd Garrison, not Maria Weston Chapman, not Lydia Marie Child, not even Frederick Douglass, as influential as he was. It's Sumner. I don't think there's any doubt about that when you look at it. He does it at great cost, political cost, social cost, economic cost to some extent, and of course, physical cost. You know, when he's beaten to within an inch of his life in 1856 on the floor of the Senate, by Preston Brooks. The thing about Sumner that I find is he's unbuyable, he's unbribable. He really does not seek ill-gotten gain, which it's hard to say that about almost any politician in history, but you can say it about him. And I really never once saw him compromise on a principle for the sake of political expediency. Maybe that's a way to put it. And like I said, he does this at great cost, but he also does it with some serious personal flaws, right? You guys know this. Tough guy to get along with. His friends could only take him in very small doses. We all have friends like that. Sumner was that person. Almost humorless. Just had a very, very tough time relating to people. Wasn't close to his family. He's a twin, for crying out loud. And he has almost no relationship with his twin sister, Matilda. He has one close familial relationship, and that's his sister Mary, who dies in 1844. As you guys who've read the book will recall, is Sumner was sick in the bed in the same room next to her, and kind of watches her die, and that really impacts him. And his love for Mary comes through, I think, in all his letters, and I try to express that in the book the best way possible. So he has a really tough time. He's humorless for the most part. One of his colleagues at Harvard said, you could say to Charles Sumner, the moon is made of green cheese. And he would spend 3 hours arguing with you why that can't be true scientifically. So he's one of those kind of downers at parties, at gatherings. Somebody makes a joke, he kind of says, well, that really can't be. And so he has a really tough time with people. And I say that because it does impact him in a negative way. Alliances which are part and parcel of politics, he has a tough time developing. It hurts him, it kind of delays a lot of the great arguments he makes, I think. And it hurts him when he gets caned. It hurts him when he gets caned. Nobody really comes to his aid, in his moment of truth, when he's getting beat. But on the equal rights front and on the anti-slavery front, I think he's unparalleled during that time. I think we owe him so much. It takes a long time. I mean, he ends the slavery fight when the 13th Amendment is passed in 1865, after this horrific war, brutal, carnage-filled war. His equal rights desires and goals take a lot longer to unfold and to develop, and we're still doing that today. But I think part of his legacy, Sumner's legacy, is we owe him so much for his vision. And we owe him so much for his relentlessness. And we owe him so much for his courage, like his true courage. That word gets bandied around a lot, but Sumner truly has it. At a time, think about this, when he first goes to the Senate in 1852, he delivers this incredible Freedom National speech in opposition to the fugitive slave law. It's the first major anti-slavery speech in American history. In 1852, because of course slavery had been kind of managed, finessed north and south before Sumner goes there and upsets that apple cart, that social apple cart, that economic apple cart, all of that. He gets caned in 1856, and then in 1860 delivers the last major anti-slavery speech in American history, the barbarism of slavery. In 1860, just before the Lincoln campaign and his election, and then the South secedes, and the rest becomes history. So you take Sumner, he believes, the thing that so impresses me about him, is he believes in America. He believes the birthright, America's birthright was freedom and liberty, and that slavery is a perversion of that. And that the government's support of slavery is not this inevitable outcome from the Constitution and from the Declaration of Independence, but kind of an ignorant misreading of those documents, which he says are freedom-based, 100% freedom-based. So I think we owe him for all of those things in his belief in America. So I'm going to try to get to questions and let the rest of this story unfold, because it's a fascinating story, and I really appreciate it. What's your name? Your name? Harriet? Harriet, I really appreciate Harriet saying to me that the book was hard to put down, right, Harriet? You said it. She had to keep turning the pages. And so the story, I think, is a fascinating story, and as Harriet points out, and I must agree with you. So let's get to questions, and we'll let the rest of the story go. And I can take questions, and by the way, when we get to questions, you'll be first. When we get to questions, we're there now. You guys can ask anything. You can ask about this book, history, publishing, writing. I get a lot of writing process questions. Those are all fair game. Happy to do that. I feel like you guys have just honored me again, so I'll try to honor you as best I can by being as forthright and honest as I can. Yes, ma'am. And I'll repeat the question. So you will.
Actually, I have two questions.
You have two questions.
One is, did he have any influence in the formation of the 54th Regiment out of Boston, Black Regiment?
Do you want me to answer both at the same? Do you want me to ask
answer
both?
that one.
No, he did not have any influence in, I would say, in the formation of the 54th.
Okay.
Supporter of them, of the 54th, supporter of black troops fighting for the Union, definitely. Wanted the Emancipation Proclamation for numerous reasons, but that was one of them. That would kind of clear the way in some, even though it doesn't directly affect Northern troops, it affects the South, blacks in the South, but he felt like that would be a good linchpin to have African American troops fight for the Union. So, but doesn't really have a lot to do with that. And what's your second question?
Who is the Charles? Who is the Sumner Tom?
Who is the Sumner Tom? Okay. All right, that's the most crucial question. That is the first person asking the question. It's a general from East Boston during the War of 1812, totally unrelated to Sumner, whose last name was Sumner. A footnote in history, and this tunnel that's always under construction? There it is. Yes. Yes, Ellen.
I've got two questions, but the most pressing one is, I'm very curious about his relationship with Lincoln, because Lincoln was such a consummate politician. I mean, he has a team of rivals.
Yeah.
He knows how to work people to his advantage, and yet Sumner seems to be out in left field.
Yeah, don't ask your second question until I
Okay.
answer that one. Because it's a great question, and of course, a large part of this book is the Sumner-Lincoln relationship. The book opens, the prologue of the book opens, you guys, even though those of you who haven't finished the book, the prologue of the book is Sumner sitting at Lincoln's bedside, sitting vigil the night that he shot, all night long. They were very close, the two were very close. It's a short relationship. It's only 4 years. They only know each other for 4 years. Sumner meets Lincoln when Lincoln literally comes east for his first inauguration in February of 1861. And of course, Lincoln's assassinated in 65, so it's that short term. But I will say, the two men have a lot in common, right? Besides both of them being tall, 6'4", almost identical, they loved the Union. That is, they wanted to keep the Union together. They detested slavery, although it takes Lincoln a little longer, and with Sumner's help, to get to the point where he fully detests slavery, let me put it that way. They're both founders of the Republican Party, the new anti-slavery Republican Party, all of that. And they both really revere the founding documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And I think they both learn from each other. So Sumner, I think, teaches Lincoln a lot about raw courage and character and standing tall, even in the midst of, even if it means political blowback. I think Sumner talks about that and says that Lincoln needs to do that. Sumner's a little, at the outset, Sumner's a little concerned about Lincoln. Is this, he's kind of he's an imperial Northeast elitist, Sumner is. So wondering if this hayseed from the Midwest is going to be any good when he gets nominated in 1860, right? Who's this log splitter? Sumner, this Harvard guy, is like looking down his nose at him. And he finally comes to realize, wow, this guy is pretty deft. He is a pretty good politician. So I think they learn from each other. I think Sumner teaches Lincoln a lot about this standing up. He is relentless as he pushes Lincoln to declare that this war is not just about keeping the Union intact, but it's about abolishing slavery. Lincoln comes to this conclusion in late 1861, and it's Sumner who is the main influence on him, right? He is relentless talking to Lincoln about issuing the Emancipation Proclamation. Very, very important. Sumner says, you have to do it, you have to do it, you have to do it. He's in his ear for a long time. Lincoln says, because Lincoln is a good politician, I need a win before we can do this. Basically, we're getting our heads handed to us by the Confederates. This is 1862, right? Sumner's like, where's the Emancipation Proclamation? Where's the Emancipation Proclamation? I need a win. And so Lincoln finally gets a very narrow win at Antietam. It's almost a draw, Antietam. September 17th, 1862, bloodiest day in American history. But he gets this really narrow win and uses that as the launch pad to issue the proclamation on September 22nd, 5 days later, to take effect on January 1, 1863. So Lincoln kind of goes back at him a little bit there. But I think there's a couple other areas that they learn from each other. Particularly Sumner learns from Lincoln. He learns a little bit about humor, the importance of humor. Sumner is basically humorless. And he learns from Lincoln that it's a valuable tool. It's a valuable tool in politics. And my favorite example is very early, when they first meet. If you guys remember the anecdote, when they first meet. So Lincoln has come east. He's at the hotel in Washington, D.C. in February. You'll recall that inaugurations were in March before they were moved back. So it's February, and the president-elect is receiving people. Hey, how are you? Come in, nice. Sumner comes in, and Lincoln's like, wow, you're pretty tall. He hasn't seen anyone that's as tall as him, as Lincoln. And so what does Lincoln say to Sumner? If you remember the anecdote, let's stand back to back to see who's taller. Lincoln says. Sumner doesn't know what to do with that. He's completely flummoxed by it. And he mutters something like, instead of uniting our backs, let's unite our fronts against slavery. You know? So he kind of walks out of the room, and Lincoln says after, I've never met a bishop, but that man reminds me of a bishop. He's very formal, very imposing, very imperious. But after a fashion, Sumner does soften a bit, like Lincoln teaches him the importance of it. Lincoln used humor all the time. Sarcasm. Lincoln's one of the most sarcastic presidents ever when you read some of his letters. So he does teach him a little bit about that. He teaches Sumner about politics. And yes, principles are important, but sometimes there are politics that need to be taken into consideration. When does he do that most? During the Emancipation Proclamation, right? Sumner is on Lincoln. Remember what the Emancipation Proclamation does. It frees slaves only in those states, right, in rebellion against the United States, against the federal country. And so that is the South that's seceded. However, there are 4 border states, part of the Union, in which slavery is thriving, right? Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri, all slave states. And so Sumner's like, you can't just do southern states with the Emancipation Proclamation. You need to do these border states, these 4 northern border states that are part of the Union. Don't be hypocritical. You need to include them in the Emancipation Proclamation. Lincoln says, hold on one second. I hope I have God on my side in this struggle, but I must have Kentucky. I must have Kentucky. Kentucky has farmland. Kentucky has factories. Kentucky has population for troops. Kentucky is the bulwark against Indiana and Illinois just to the north. Lincoln says, if I lose Kentucky, I most certainly am going to lose Maryland. They're going to leave the Union if we do this. And if we lose Maryland, guess what that's right next to? Washington, D.C. He said, I feel if we lose Kentucky, we will lose the whole game. We will lose the whole game. So for now, we're just talking about these southern states. And Sumner gets that. You know, it takes him a while, you know, because at one point Lincoln said he thought Charles Sumner was full of childlike idealism. And I think there's a little bit of truth to that. Like his strength and his courage and his character and his idealism are all strengths. But I think Lincoln went on to a little bit of something there, because Lincoln, I believe, is right that had the Emancipation Proclamation included the 4 border states, they all would have seceded. They would have joined the South. They would have joined the Confederacy. So the whole game would have been lost. So he teaches Sumner that. And I think the other thing Lincoln teaches Sumner in this very complex relationship, but very important one, is the importance of relating to people, how important people relationships are. Sumner's best example of that, he writes, 1865 at City Point, Grant's headquarters at City Point, Virginia. South is just about finished here, just about finished. But there's a big Union hospital at City Point. And Sumner watched in awe one day, over 2 days I believe it was, when Lincoln shook the hands of 5,000 wounded Union soldiers. Now these are terribly wounded. Think of Civil War wounds, the worst ever. Amputations, all very unusual for there not to be amputations every other bed, arms, legs, etc. And Charles Sumner said he seemed to know, he being Lincoln, seemed to know just what to say to each man. He seemed to know how long to stay at a bedside and when to move on. He seemed to know how to be inspirational without being patronizing. And Sumner didn't have those skills, but he at least learns, oh, this is why it's so important. You know, you can't always go it alone. You have to connect like this. And so I think all that is part and parcel of their relationship in their book. So what's question 2?
Question 2 is,
I thought I forgot you had a second
No,
question.
I was fascinated that his best friend is Henry Wadsworth Longfellow.
Yeah.
And that was a long friendship.
Great. So one of his friendships that does last is with Longfellow. He's friends with both Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and Fanny Longfellow, Fanny Appleton Longfellow. By the way, I did an event at the Longfellow House just last week. It was great. So it was really fun to be there and to see the house and to see some of the original Longfellow stuff, etc. So fantastic. But yeah, he's good friends with them. He really considers Henry, I guess, a confidant. You know, they talk about ideas, they share ideas, but here again, and he views Fanny as a genius. Very bright, very intelligent. You know, he's a great relationship with her. He's very good friends with her. But again, here's the kind of the Sumner, I guess, narcissism and self-absorbed person that he is. When they announce that they're getting married, his first words aren't congratulations. His first words are, what am I going to do now that I can't have these great intellectual conversations with Henry? What am I going to do? And then, if you recall, kind of worms his way into getting an invitation from Fanny to go on their honeymoon. And you know, Sumner again doesn't really have that social grace to say no thanks. He literally goes. He goes. They take the train out to the Adirondacks, etc. And beyond that, there's not a lot in the historical record except that he read the funeral orations of a French philosopher on the train ride out there. No comment from Henry or Fanny as to how they enjoyed that. And so yeah, but they are very good friends. I mean, in all seriousness, Henry talks about how close Sumner is to their children. Very close, good friends. He visited often. When Sumner has a falling out with Nathan Appleton in the 1840s, because Sumner goes after Congressman Robert Winthrop for his decision to support the Mexican War, and Appleton doesn't like the way he's done it. Appleton pretty much banishes him, but his daughter, you know, they have a room for Sumner for him to stay when he comes and visits. Now, they did tell him, let us know in advance, because if Dad's here, you can't come over. But still, you know, they were close. You know, they were close to that. And then when Fanny died, Fanny dies a horrible death, right? She's burned to death. She burns to death. Almost in front of Henry. He comes running in from the other room and she tries to put her out. And Sumner's devastated by that. He was good friends with her. So it's a good relationship, a solid relationship, and kind of a weird relationship. You know, it's the Sumner relationship. You know those friends where you say, yeah, we kind of have this strange relationship. Like, that's what it was. Yeah.
I think that's the kind of relationship he had with his wife. I thought that was a very strange relationship.
So Sumner gets married late in life, 1866. Yeah, he was 56, she was 28, half their age. And it's a disaster from very early. It starts off, you know, in the first few weeks as being, you know, nice, amicable. Sumner's thrilled. He can't believe how great domestic life is. And then I don't want to get too far into it for those of you who haven't read the book, because it's really the juiciest part of the book. I think it's the juiciest one. So I'll just say that it ends in a disaster. There's lots of accusations back and forth. It becomes public. The divorce, the reasons for it, etc., etc. So, you know, this is not my coy way of saying buy the book, but it is my way of saying, like, it's hard to do it real justice. You have to read it, and it's a great story. It's very sad for Sumner. He's devastated when it happens, and it all becomes public. But that's his sort of foray into the married world, you know. Yeah. Willie, what do you got? Don't stump me, Willie. Don't ask me if he's ever been to Bridgewater. Yeah. All right. Yes, what is it?
No, two questions. The first is, Governor Gardner, when Sumner was king, had suggested to the legislature that they pay all of his, medical expenses.
Yeah.
Did that happen? Did anything
Yeah.
come from that?
Great, no, so as Willie points out, Gardner suggests that the state pay Sumner's medical expenses when he's king to within an inch of his life and has a very difficult time recovering and getting back. The state says no, but Sumner also kind of declines it, says, I appreciate the offer, it's a generous offer, but he does decline it. And as a matter of fact, I would say Gardner was a lukewarm supporter of Sumner prior to the caning, like a lot of people. And the caning endears him to Sumner more, yeah. So what's the other question?
The other question is, when he died and they had the funeral procession.
Yeah.
And, his ex-wife was, the curtains were drawn, and then she, made a statement to the effect, look at what he's doing now, he can't even go out and style something,
Well, what you said, so what Willie's talking about is Sumner, for those of you who haven't read it, or only have gotten a little way through it. What Willie's talking about is during this funeral, it's a massive funeral in Boston for Sumner. In fact, 50,000 people filed past his body that lays in state at the State House. Amazing number of people for a senator. But as it's winding its way through the streets of Boston, his ex-wife is behind the curtain, looking out the window, closes the curtain and says, "That Charles, he never did have any tact," because all of the traffic is backed up on the other. The street is jammed. And so that is great. I love that story. Thank you for asking that. What else? What else? Yeah?
I want to continue what Harriet said about being a page turner and how interesting it was. And in one of our discussions, we said, why aren't our history books written like this?
Yeah.
To humanize history rather than memorizing dates, being able to connect what's happening in Washington with what's happening in Mexico or what's happening hither, thither, and yon. And you brought it all together so beautifully.
Do I need to repeat that? Thanks, Auntie. No. No, listen, I will tell you, I have these discussions often, I'm kind of an evangelist about this. You are not required to read boring history. I want you to know that. I tell that, every high school I visit a lot of high schools, I tell them, in front of their teachers, if your teacher is giving you boring history to read, demand that you read something else. Like, it may not do you any good, you might flunk the course, I don't know, but you are not required to. I think that, the second part of that word is story, right? Like the story, it's all about story for me. The research, I think my research is as good as anybody. You guys can read the bibliographic essay to see the kind of research I do. So you do have to have that solid foundation of research. But you have to write it in a compelling storytelling way. When I write with you people in mind. I have a picture of Harriet on my screen. When I write, I don't write for academics. I don't write for reviewers, critics. I write for what's her first name again? Gloria. I write for Gloria, who might say to herself, "Listen, I'm a little tired tonight. I have this book on my book stand. When is the next page break?" Like we all do, right? Yeah. How far am I? Yeah. Okay, so when I write, that's what I have in mind, is that what is going to keep you reading? Where do I break this scene so that you'll want to come back for more? Yes. But where's this logical place to go? So you will never pick up a Puleo book, I will guarantee you this, for as long as I write. You will never pick up a Puleo book where there are 30 pages of uninterrupted text without a page break, a section break, a chapter break, whatever, okay? I'll give you that vow. You will not. As a matter of fact, when I go to a bookstore, if there's a book I'd say, I'm kind of interested in this book, if I come across a book that does that, I tend not to buy it. I just tend to say, no, 35 pages of uninterrupted text, how am I gonna do that? So I try to write, I tell anyone who writes nonfiction, and maybe particularly history, because it has that, am I talking loud enough for you so I see you? Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay, yeah, no, I wasn't sure, well, without a mic, it's hard to tell if I'm talking loud enough.
No,
And you were
please,
cupping
not
your
you.
ear. Yeah. Well, that's, okay, sorry. I can't talk any louder. Yes. So I always tell people when you're writing nonfiction or history, that use some elements that fiction writers use. End a chapter in an interesting, dramatic way. Break your section here. Instead of letting it run for another 30 pages or another 10 pages even, or another 5 pages, it's a good spot to end it here. So the reader is almost caught up in the story and is learning the history almost despite themselves. Does that make sense? Like you're using that story in the characters, the real life characters, but we call them characters in nonfiction, to kind of pull that big history along. So that's the theory I use. That's not the theory, the technique that I use, the style that I use. I like to think that if my name wasn't on the book, you would know it was by me. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, go ahead.
I wondered what piece of information when you were doing the research excited you the most?
Well, that's a great question. What piece of information excited me the most? I guess, because I had written a book called The Cane back in 2012. So I guess the new piece, the Lincoln Sumner piece, I think is the part that fascinates me. It's why I started the book with the prologue of him at Lincoln's bedside, where he says, if you remember, once Lincoln dies at 7:22 a.m. on April 15th, I sobbed like a woman. Sumner writes. And so I think that it's not exactly one episode, but it's kind of that relationship, because it had really, I don't even think David Donald explores it enough in his biography. And I feel like there's a lot to be mined out of that, and that's what I tried to do. So I'd say that was my most exciting, because I'll tell you, we almost go to war with England in 1861 over the Trent Affair. And Lincoln has very little foreign policy experience, and Sumner basically keeps us out of war while we're fighting the Confederates. Lincoln relies on him. They have that Christmas meeting. I don't know if you remember, but they meet at Christmas time, Lincoln's cabinet. But Sumner, right then, is the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So Lincoln wants him in there. Seward's not thrilled about that. Secretary of State Seward's not thrilled about that. But Sumner, with all his European contacts and his contacts in England, helps us avoid war. I mean, think about this. England was going to had already moved about 8,000 troops to Canada, part of the empire, for a potential invasion of New Hampshire and Vermont after the Trent Affair, which is basically, we took British sailors captive when they were on a neutral boat, and then they were a neutral country, even though those sailors were trying to do business for the Confederacy, on behalf of the Confederacy that England did support. So all that part, Lincoln and Sumner, all of that emerges as part of the research, I think was my favorite part. Yeah. What else? Don't be shy in the back here. I got all these front row people asking questions. Yes.
All right, well, so kind of jumping on what they said as well.
Yeah.
It's like, so what makes you pick someone like Charles Sumner, and how come a man that just gave us so much, how come we never learned any of this? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I could argue that we never learned that there were women even, that they did anything, but, I mean, he was a famous white male, and that's usually who they did tell us about, and he was, I don't know, I've asked so many people of late, and most people said, either that they thought he was named after the tunnel, or that they knew he was caned, and,
So,
yeah.
Listen, I don't have a great answer for your question, why don't we know more about him? Why weren't we taught that much about him? I'm married to a teacher, I love teachers. Maybe I don't love administrators that much, although she was an administrator too, so that present company excluded. I guess some of the curriculum some of the curricula that gets developed, I think, lacks in a lot of ways. And it lacks, again, in these people who are talking about these real people with their real stories. I'll give you this example. I'll give you this story. So I got contacted, this is now probably, Kate, what would you say, 10 or 12 years ago? With the publishers?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe 12 years ago. I got contacted by some history textbook publishers. The three big ones, McDougall Littell was one, I can't remember all of them, Harcourt Brace maybe.
Pearson.
What's that?
Pearson.
Yes. So there were three of them, and they said, can you take a look at this history textbook in the teacher textbook that we use? And I said, sure, I'll take a look at it. So I'm going through it. So I'm looking at this textbook, and there's this very soft narrative like this, just kind of like this. And never a place where you grab these students and say, wait, you're at Lincoln here, you have to stop for a minute and understand why 20 books come out about him every 25 years. Almost literally. Every 25 years, 20 books come out about Lincoln. Stop! It's more important than the Gadsden Purchase. The Gadsden Purchase is kind of a nice thing, but this thing is Lincoln. It's far more important. You have to pay attention here. There's reasons for this. So I get to the Teddy Roosevelt section. And, here it is, San Juan Hill, Rough Riders, environmentalist, president, it's going on like this. And I realize, I say to these publishers, I come into the meeting after, it's me with all these publishers around this round table. And I say, there's this great Teddy Roosevelt story in 1912 when he's running for president as a third-party bull moose candidate. And he's in Milwaukee, and he's on his way to give a speech, and he has the speech wrapped up in his breast pocket right here, and an assassin shoots him. And the bullet goes through the pages and lodges in his chest. And his entourage wants to take him to the hospital, and Teddy says, no, I have a speech to deliver. He goes to this arena, there's 5,000 people, no mic, it's like tonight, no mic. And he says to the crowd, can you please keep side conversation to a minimum? I've just been shot. My voice isn't as strong as it normally is. So he gives this 1-hour speech, discards one blood-stained manuscript page after another during his speech, and then says to his party, okay, I'll go to the hospital now. Goes to the hospital. The doctors believe it's too wedged into his chest. He had great chest muscles. Teddy always prided himself on working out. And it lodged in the muscles. You'll be okay. And he dies of natural causes 8 years later, having, they leave the bullet alone. But I say to these textbook publishers, why isn't that story in the Roosevelt Center? And they say, they're not stupid people. And they say, history of all the subjects. It doesn't happen with physics usually. It doesn't happen with French. But history, it gets political. So, if you look on the back of these textbooks, there's like 150 names of advisory board members. Yeah. So sometimes liberals don't want this in, and sometimes conservatives don't want this in, as we kind of publish these textbooks. And so you end up with this really dry, kind of account, right? And so, I think a lot of teachers are starting to move away from the textbooks now, and I think, like, for me, if you teach these kids about primary sources and what's important and look at what these people actually said and what these people actually did. I did a thing at Notre Dame Academy last year, all girls school, Catholic school, on primary sources. And I felt like it went over really well. The kids were very attentive and they seemed to learn a lot. Because they're actually hearing what these people said in the moment. Like one of the things I tell I teach on an adjunct basis, and I haven't taught for a couple semesters, but I teach a World War II class. And one of the things I tell my students is, listen, you have to put yourself in the moment. You have to put yourself in that time period. So what do I mean by that? Let's use this example. Harry Truman makes the decision to drop the atomic bombs. We can have a discussion about that. We can have a discussion as to whether it was the right decision, the wrong decision, why he did it, et cetera, et cetera. You can do all that. He knew it was a hugely powerful weapon. you can have a moral discussion about it. What you can't do is criticize Harry Truman because the half-life of radiation turned out to be 90 years. Because he did not know it then. He knew it was powerful. He knew there was a danger of the atom, of the explosion getting away, maybe even burning the atmosphere. All that stuff was out there. But so you need to put yourself in that moment and judge history by what people knew at that time. Now, there were people ahead of their times, people behind their times, just like today. And I always say, like, be careful. Be careful whose statues you tear down. Because 100 years from now, they're going to tear down Gloria's statue. I don't know why. I don't know why yet. But there will be a reason. Like I always say that today, what's the date today? 19th? So I call it the arrogance of presentism. That people say that everything that happened before November 19th, 2024, those people were all idiots. They had no idea what they were doing. I can't believe it. Beware of that. So always try to put yourself in the moment. That's how I kind of teach the kids to understand that these are real life people. They're actually people making these decisions. Some of them are poor, some of them are rich, some of them are black, some of them are white, some of them are men, some of them are women, but they're actually people like who are making those decisions. So when you say, I never would have done that, make sure, because sometimes when the rubber hits the road, you will do that. So that's all. That's kind of like, I feel like I might have been lecturing too long there. Next question, yes.
What are you working on next?
Yeah, I am working on what I loosely refer to as Book 9. So I'm not quite ready to give you the topic yet, but I will tell you this, there is going to be one, so the contract is signed, that's good, right? And I really like it, really like the talk, very excited about it, I think you guys will like it. I have whether you buy books or not, I have my mailing, if you want to sign up for my mailing list, just name and email. I do maybe 4 or 5 e-newsletters a year. So I'm not one of these people that comes out every day with something, you're not going to get spammed. But I'm doing one in December. That won't be the Book 9 revelation, I'm telling you that now. But that'll let you know kind of what's up with me. But that's where I'll reveal it. So you'll be among the first several thousand to know.
Can you even talk about the time frame?
So the time frame. Well, I can tell you this. My manuscript is due March 1st, 2026. So 2025 is going to be a big writing year. And by the way, you guys are saying that like, oh, that's a long time. It isn't. I'm frightened by that time. Because the research is just about done and the writing is just starting. So. And when I say my manuscript is due March 1st, that's to my editor. So I have to get it past my wife and 2 other readers first, so I gotta give them a little time. I gotta back up, so I gotta give you a little time, Kate a little time here. I have to do my own hard edit here. Already, I feel like I'm in 2025 still, that I have to be done. So it's exciting, I love that part of it, but it's looming out there. So that's when the manuscript's due. The publication date hasn't been determined yet. As you guys may or may not know, there's often like a year gap between when your manuscript gets accepted and when the book comes out. By the time you go through edits, by the time you do all that pre-publicity, the book gets designed, printed, gets to the bookstores. The publishing community moves pretty slow, I would say. So it's about a year, and then you say, oh, do we bring it out in the spring or do we bring it out in the fall? I don't want to bring it out in the fall because it'll compete with those Christmas books. Okay, let's bring it out in the spring. Like all that is part of the discussion. I'm just being honest with you. I don't have a lot of say. I have some say on when the book will actually be released, but not final say. That's my publisher. Does that answer your question?
I was actually referring to the subject time frame.
Subject time frame.
Is it modern?
Wait, are you trying to trick me into saying that ain't gonna work. The subject time frame. You think I haven't heard that question before? I think you'll enjoy it.
This ties in with what you've just been discussing. Can you just review quickly your overall process? I am absolutely boggled by how you keep your facts straight, your timeline straight. Obviously, you have to keep track of all the source documentation for your index. I mean, just for me to write a short 2-page article on the mess, so.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'd say I'm pretty disciplined. You do have to be disciplined, you know, there's a creative piece, I think, for sure, but you have to be disciplined. You have to say, okay, I'm gonna try to, all right, I've signed this contract, you know, so let's back up. How much time is it gonna take me to write the book, and how much time is it gonna take me to do the research? And then you have to sort of stay to a schedule. You have to do that. And I try to have all my research done before I start the writing. And when I say all, if I come across this great eureka letter while I'm writing, of course I'll use it. But I try to have I like to know what I have. I hoard it like a hoarder, like this. I like to know what I have before I start the writing. And the reason for that is, it gives me a sense of, I have a feeling this is gonna happen in chapter 2, and I think this is gonna happen in chapter 10, and I have enough documentation for the whole thing. And if I ever have any writer's block, which, knock on wood, I almost never have. But if I do, I can always turn to a document to sort of say, oh, I think I might start the scene this way. I remember this letter from, so I like to have all my research done before the writing starts. And that, I think, is just a matter of laying it out. Sometimes I use, for Sumner I did this, and I'm doing it for book 9. I have this big tri-fold cardboard thing that I lay out the timeline on, and you know, here's what's happening, here, just to kind of keep that in my head. So yeah, a lot of it is you just pull on a ball of yarn. I know this doesn't sound so scientific, but a lot of it is you pull on a ball of yarn and man, stuff starts happening. Wow, here's another document, here's a great piece. I have a very simple filing system. I do everything. I mean, I obviously am online to do a lot of research, but I print everything. I print all of my research. So I literally have file folders, you know, that could be vertical folders, that is topic, you know, could be date folders, whatever the thing calls for. So everything I find online, I print out. That is what I do. Because I do a lot of work, you know, like I write at one spot, that's my home office. I'm not one of these people, oh, you can write under an apple tree. I can't, like, I'm sorry if anyone in the room can. I can't, I do it out of my home office. But reading these documents, like, sometimes if I want to get out, I walk Nantasket Beach, I call it my Nantasket office. So if I'm walking Nantasket Beach, I'll take this big stack of documents down there, do my walk, you know, and then read through those like in my car, or if it's a nice day, you know, just on the bench or whatever, and make my marks and so you can do that in a lot of different places. Once the writing starts, I'm kind of tied to my laptop in my home office. That's my writing space, you know. So that, and then you're thinking a lot about the book, right? I'm always thinking about it. Once the writing starts, people ask, do I write every day? Once the writing starts, I do. Even if it's a short amount. Like right now, I'm in the early stages of the writing. But yeah, I wrote a little bit today. But I'm always thinking about it. I mean, Kate will say, you know, will ask me something, she'll be like, you're thinking about the book, aren't you? I'm like, no, sweetie, I heard exactly what you said. No. So yeah, but it's always up there, you know, it's always in your head. And then I do keep a little notebook next to the cliche little notepad next to on my nightstand. And if I bolt up right at 2:30 in the morning, usually I just have to write 1 or 2 words, you know, Sumner marriage, you know, that's it. And I'll know what that is to go into the next day. So I do that. So there's no magic answer to it. I feel like I'm not answering you in a good way.
No, it's fine.
But
one real quick question.
Yeah, of course.
I know that a lot of people, when they're researching historical documents, have trouble reading the writing, especially because it's all in cursive. I'm making an assumption that you've mastered that. And what do you think will happen with future generations who are not?
yeah, well, it's a great question. And in fact, Sumner's writing is horrific. So one of the sources that I use, and I would say mastered it as much as I can, but one of the great sources was this historian Beverly Palmer did a nice annotated book of, I think, 400 Sumner letters. So that was nice, As a primary source. But to answer your bigger question, I'll give you a perfect example of this. At that NDA primary source, Notre Dame Academy primary source thing I did, I did one on Lincoln, and like how personal he was. And there's this one time, Charles Sumner is very good friends with Mary Todd Lincoln, right? After Willie dies in February of 1862, Mary's devastated. So is Abraham Lincoln, but Mary Todd never really recovers. And at one point, Lincoln sends a very short note to Sumner. Mr. Sumner, please come. Mrs. Lincoln needs you. Because Abraham wasn't sure how to deal with her depression, her anxiety, like maybe Sumner could do something. So one of the primary sources I used in Lincoln's hand was that, very short. So I said to one of the girls in the class, all right, who wants to read that? Gloria. Gloria. And she said to me, I'm sorry, I can't read the cursive. So I said, whoa, I didn't even think of that. And this is a good school. This is an expensive, these are good students, all good students. But that's what she said, I'm sorry, I can't read the cursive. Oh, okay. And somebody else said, oh, I can read it. So I don't know what it's going to mean. It doesn't bode well, I don't think,
I think that's a good career to go into.
Learning how to read cursive. Teaching cursive, yeah.
Get a lot of money as a translator.
What else, guys? Willie, what's up?
No question.
No.
Two statements.
Yeah.
When we met 21 years ago.
Can't believe that. You look as good as you did then.
Yeah, the dark kind, I told you, the reason why it's stuck in my mind because my maternal grandmother, who grew up in Boston, she used to tell me about the molasses flood. And so I was like 6 years old, and she would say, and she was 6 years old. She was born in 1913, so she was 6 years old when it happened. Okay. And at the time, I couldn't understand. One of the things that impacted her is she never read the book, she just read articles. There was a little 6-year-old girl that died as a result, and I think that's why it resonated with her. But that's why using primary sources is so important. And so you've done for Charles Sumner what David Blight did for Frederick Douglass, and what David McCollum did for John Adams. You make it so real, and it's so readable.
We're going to end on that note. And I am here signing. Is that okay to say that?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Thank you
And
so
I'm here
much,
to sign
Steve.
up for the newsletter. Thank you guys again. You guys.